Welcome everybody to the Tuesday night's Gender and Sexuality group. We are Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. We are a coalition that was built about 9 years ago around surveillance in the police state. Um, I've been doing things on and off with them for the last 8 years, 9 years almost. Um, I will say how this group started. I think this group started both as a need to talk about transphobia and queerphobia and misogyny that was happening in the direct space, as well as the bigger picture of how surveillance impacts the lives of queer and trans folks, especially women of color and especially trans and GNC folks of color. Um, and tonight's conversation is about abolition, actually, which I'm super excited about. We've been
Abolition as it applies to
Sorry, let me keep talking. Let you, let me, yeah. Um, so abolition. So like I think, sorry that got me off my. I do want to share that this is being recorded. That this will be on our website as well as on YouTube. Um, and I want to share that we are not about policing or controlling who can talk, but we also don't want people bombing us, Zoom bombing us, like that has happened in the past. So like we do mitigate that by only allowing certain people to talk. And if you do want to talk at the end or if you have questions, please feel free to DM them in the chat, or you can go ahead and text Hamid. Hamid, what's your number?
My number is 562-230-4578, 562-230-4578. And folks can message in chat as well or raise their hand. That option is there too.
Okay. So I am going to let each person introduce themselves. First and foremost, like I said, I'm Chella. I've been organizing with Stop LAPD Spying, as well as LA Can and Gender Justice LA and a bunch of other radical ass groups. And I'm a member of a punk band, another part of the conversation. And my pronouns are she and they. Why don't you go ahead, Sarah, name yourself, where you're from, and your pronoun.
I'm sorry if I'm breathing a little heavy. I'm walking up a hill. My name is Syra Evans. I have done work with places like TYP, Trans Youth Project, San Diego State University, UCSD, USD, doing all kinds of work regarding race, regarding gender, regarding prison abolition as well, too, right? Because I feel like this is a conversation about how the carceral state affects each of our lives. And I think I'm also just here because I feel like we can all night talk about abolition, but we can't talk about abolition unless we talk about Black trans women's abolition, right? The abolition of slavery as it pertains to Black trans people. So that is who I am and why I'm here.
And what's your pronoun, babe?
My pronouns are she, her, and hers, or they, them, and theirs.
Okay, thank you, Sai. Next, we have Draven. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hey, what's up? Sorry about that. I just went ahead and muted myself. My name is Draven. I'm from Florida. I did previously live in LA a couple years ago. So when I did work out there, I did work with like USC and just, a couple smaller nonprofits. And then I ended up moving back to Florida. So now I currently do some remote work with the Never Too Late to Dream Foundation. They provide scholarships and educational resources and sustainable living to people in California, around the San Jose area. And then, of course, Freedom Overground, which is a nonprofit focused on incarcerated trans people, and that's located in South Georgia.
And what are your pronouns?
He and him.
Okay, right. And then we have Tony. Go ahead and list who you are.
Hi, I'm Tony. My pronouns are they, and she. I've done two major projects, which one was with the Queer People of Color Conference at UC Riverside. I did a workshop on the queer anarchistic person of color. Then I also did another workshop recently at UCLA to talk about harm reduction and how trans people of color should be the focus of what recovery programs should look like.
Thank you, Tony. And then Mariela, would you like to introduce Carolina?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariela Saba. I'm a member and organizer with Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And I invited my good friend Carolina Lopez to introduce herself to be part of the panel. And I'm going to be translating for her. So quiero invitarte, Carolina, que te presentes tu nombre, de dónde vienes, tu organización y tus pronombres. Bienvenida.
No puedo escuchar.
Ok. Mi nombre es Carolina López. Estoy aquí en Tucson, Arizona. Soy mexicana. Y estoy aquí con la organización de Mariposas Sin Fronteras y apoyamos a personas dentro y fuera de las detenciones. Y también soy parte de otras organizaciones nacionales y locales. Y gracias por el espacio. Mis pronombres son ellos.
Gracias. Gracias, Carolina. Everyone, this is Carolina Lopez. She's based in Tucson, Arizona. Her roots are from Mexico, and she is from Butterflies Without Borders. They work fighting against deportation and detention and the liberation of trans and queer folks. And she's also part of other local and national organizations, and her pronouns are she.
Okay, well, and that's our panel today. So, I mean, first and foremost, I think we have to talk about what abolition really looks like. Not only the definition as like a Webster's dictionary would say it, but what does it really mean for Black, trans, and queer folks, especially those who are suffering? What does abolition really look like and mean? And we can go first with Carolina, and then we can do Sai. So would you like to?
Sure. I was texting the question. Carolina, primero queremos comenzar la conversación en qué es abolición.
No te escucho.
¿Se escucha mejor?
Sí.
Sí, sí.
Era mi dedo tapando. Queremos hablar sobre abolición y primeramente empezar la conversación ahí. ¿Qué es para ti abolición y por qué es importante para la comunidad trans y queer el tema de abolición?
Pues para mí, abolición es el término de una opresión, término de una vida de encierro, de una vida de tortura, de una vida de sobrevivir, de sobrevivencia para empezar a vivir. Es un término de la supremacía de cualquier trato inhumano hacia un ser humano, el cierre de lugares que no tienen fundamento para estar ahí.
Yeah. So Carolina, when she thinks about abolition, she thinks about incarceration and the torture that incarceration is, the oppression that it is, and that it has no founding, that it should not it should not exist in incarceration.
Go ahead, Sai. Same question for Syra. Thank you.
Well, I think that abolition is important for Black trans people specifically, because many of us who have been incarcerated find ourselves after having been incarcerated. I think many Black trans women who have been criminalized were trying to find ways for themselves to be safe and ways for themselves to eat. and in the process of trying to exercise their own will to survive and their own will to find out who they are, they were criminalized. And so one of the ways that we could talk about abolition, and one of the ways it's important for our community, is that when we abolish prison, that will give Black trans people the capability to live a life in public space that isn't criminalized and that is in fact honored. And so that's, for me, when I think about abolition and when I think about the carceral state and the way they've affected Black trans people, right? Many of us find ourselves in prison and in the pursuit of trying to feed ourselves and trying to create success, and then we end up criminalized for that. And then from there, you know, we discover ourselves and are trying to live our most authentic lives. So that's what I think liberation looks like and why this conversation is important.
Go ahead, Draven.
Okay, so for me personally, abolition, whenever I think about abolition, I'm indigenous. So what I think of is like, you know, First Nations and how they were able to thrive and they didn't have any issues. They didn't have police or prisons or anything like that. It was all, you know, community accountability and being accountable for your own actions. So abolition is kind of necessary so that we can focus on funding and giving our community resources and programs so that we can kind of be self-sustainable. And the current justice system is just so awful, you know, the way it treats people, especially, you know, already marginalized people, you know, people of color. And then you have, you know, gender nonconforming, just, you know, it just keeps getting worse and worse, you know, the more. And the for-profit system is really not beneficial to anyone at all. So.
Tony, the same question.
Yeah, I mean, definitely abolition is important because of the way it targets Black and brown trans queer bodies. Definitely, that's the most important part of this conversation, and how it profits off off the bodies of marginalized folks. But I also want to like recognize how these systems exist and are built on colonialism and intend to maintain the hegemonic structures of the U.S. imperial regime. Basically, like everything, everything built on this system is to help propagate the imperial, like, regime. Yeah.
I think a few of y'all touched on it. So let's be real. Last year was a record-breaking number for trans women getting murdered, especially trans women of color and trans Black women more specifically. Some of these girls were as young as 15, right? Sorry, I just realized that, yeah. Just like, you know, feeling that in my body, just gonna be honest. Some of these girls were as young as 15. So how do we stop this epidemic? How do we stop this epidemic to make, I believe that in order to like make a structure powerless, we make its power seem non-legitimate. We make it so that it doesn't need to be there, right? So how can we as a community start making the streets safer for Black trans women, for undocumented trans women, for GNC folks, and for femmes all around? Because just being honest, even in my hood, Skid Row, you know, I live in Skid Row, folks that don't know me. I live and work here. And like at any day, you could hear a man beating on a woman here. And that, you know, so how do we do that without the police? Real talk. Mariela, you can ask Carolina the question.
Yeah. La pregunta es, pues en base a que vimos el año pasado números récord de asesinatos de mujeres negras trans, ¿cómo nosotros como comunidad podemos hacer que nuestras calles sean más seguras para mujeres negras trans, para mujeres trans indocumentadas? ¿Qué es lo que podemos hacer como comunidad para parar esto o por lo menos hacerlo que sea más seguro? Y Chela compartió que ella viene de Skid Row, aquí en Los Ángeles, y diario, cada noche escucha escucha violencia. Y entonces ya, la pregunta es qué podemos hacer para que sean más seguras nuestras calles y paremos estos asesinatos de mujeres trans.
Pienso yo que como activista o como luchadora por los derechos de las mujeres trans de color y en general, pienso yo que debemos alzar nuestras voces, hacer que los congresistas nos escuchen, organizarnos más para que los congresistas puedan votar por leyes más justas para la comunidad trans, negra, de color y afrodescendientes. Yo creo que la organización y hablar con congresistas.
Está en mudo, Carolina. Ahora sí.
¿No escuchaste nada?
Sí, todo, nomás al último.
Ok. Yo pienso que el hablar para que haya más leyes más justas para todas las comunidades, en especial la comunidad trans negra, yo pienso que la solidaridad también es muy importante.
So Carolina shares two different strategies. One is organizing, and the other is raising our voices to change laws, or that people in positions within Congress can change laws to make more justice from that angle, and also for there to be more solidarity in community. Gracias, Carolina. And
Sarah, are you still with us? I guess not. Go ahead.
I'm still here, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't have very long.
Okay. Do you want to share? What do you think needs to happen for us to be safe? Real talk.
Aside from the usual things that I feel like, always need to be said, right, is first we have to understand that Black trans women are worthy of protection, right? In order for us to actually be safe, we have to be willing to say to ourselves, a trans woman is worthy of protection. And then as non-trans people, not as trans people, but as somebody who's not trans, needs to say to themselves, okay, so what am I doing now to commit to that, right? Am I gonna walk with a trans woman home? Am I gonna walk her home? Am I gonna call her, ask her to send me a text message when she's on public transportation, right? To really ask those concrete questions that make a trans woman more safe, that make a Black trans woman more safe, right? I think each of us has to make it like a thing in our own hearts where anytime we're talking about violence in a Black trans person, we must each know that what we're talking about is something that's wrong, just like any other form of violence, right? We can't normalize it, and we can't rationalize somebody being violent to a trans person. I think that's another thing. It's like it must be viewed as just as violent as any other form of violence, right? It can't be something that we justify and rationalize in our heads and make it okay. It has to be wrong every time. So.
Thank you, Sai. I hope you can stick around for the next question, but if not, it's okay. Draven, go ahead. You're next on that conversation.
Yeah. So piggybacking off of what was just talked about is about normalizing trans people in general, normalizing trans women. I feel like we live in a very cisnormative society. I feel like, when we harm trans women of color or just any trans women, we're watching the effects of a society that normalizes this hypermasculinity. And because of the way that society views trans people, it's almost seen like a threat. And we need to change. We need to start with, first of all, the mindset. Like, yes, the actions do need to come, but also we need to start with how people are thinking and how people are viewing this, because it shouldn't be some strange, weird thing. It's not an off the wall thing. we need to look at, you know, how dependent we are. I mean, you know, look at the world right now. Like, look how dependent we are of social constructs, you know, for gender and, you know, religion. I mean, like, you go to the store, you know, everything is gendered, whether it's subconscious or not, it's in your face, it's gendered, and it's being pushed on people. So also, like, just in general, for heterosexual relationships and just any kind of relationships, you know, we're also dealing with like toxic masculinity, and we're dealing with things like, oh, I don't want to be seen, you know, like this, or I don't want to be seen as less than a man or anything like that. And you have to, you know, deal with that as well. Not just toxic masculinity for men, but also female masculinity. A lot of people don't touch on female masculinity, and they always just see it as like something that's just like, oh, you know, it's okay to see, you know, this and this. But when it comes to that, it's like a double standard. And we need to stop having a double standard, and we need to just kind of sit down, and we just kind of need to have the conversation and normalize this. Like, it's not okay, you know, again, piggybacking off of what was said before me, it's not okay. We shouldn't have to do this every year. It should not be, you know, something that we have to sit down once a year and dread doing. It's something that we need to kind of sit down and be like, okay, this is an issue. We're sick of it. This needs to stop, because it shouldn't be as normalized as it is now. And every year the numbers get higher. And it's just, it's really sad. It's very hurtful. And it's like, you're just watching it. And it's like, what can I do to step up and make sure that my fellow, you know, trans women are protected? You know, as a trans man, I still face rates of violence, but not as high as a trans woman of color or another person. So what can I do as still a marginalized person, but not as marginalized with my privilege, to help protect you?
I do want to bring that in and think about like intersectionality, and think of like how we all carry oppressions and privileges in us, right? And so that, yeah, I just think about that all the time. Tony, same question. How do we stop violence against trans women?
We need to start defending Black trans men, especially communities that are and movements that are predominantly represented by brown people, because I think trans Black women exist in every single conversation, whether it's, you know, whether it's deportation or indigenous resistance. You know, we have to have this reminder that Afro groups exist in everywhere, and that when we are building these movements, we need to put them at the front of the conversations. And also too, like I mean, like, I know this is all about like also like how to stop Black trans women from being murdered, but it's also about listening to Black trans women, what they need, and like not learning how to engage with Black trans women without like you know, talking over them.
I wanted to address that because I feel like I said, in order to talk about the monster, we have to talk about the little monsters that it has created. So talking about the big monster, you know, the prison industrial complex, the school to prison pipelines, right? Who benefits from this shit? Does anybody like want to talk about that? Anybody can go ahead and chime on that on the panel. Who benefits from prison industrial complex, go to prison pipeline, the detention centers, ICE, you know, who is benefiting?
So,
go ahead.
well, when we talk about a benefit, if there can all be said that there's a benefit, right? It's never going to be at the benefit of those communities that are most policed, right? So, about this issue, and we're talking about Black trans women who may have been incarcerated before coming out to themselves and having conversations with themselves about transness, right? They're going to be arrested as a man, put in a men's prison. So who's benefiting from that, right? Is a white male who owns that prison. Who's benefiting from that is the white male gang that's down the street, the rival gang that's down the street, right? Who benefits that from that is the prison guard who gets to go home at nighttime while you sit in the jail cell. Who benefits from that, right? Is the $1 million contract that that the United States gets every year, right? For having people incarcerated. These are the things, these are the systems and people that benefit from these realities, right? And so without naming it, you can't ever hope to dismantle it without naming it. And so that's the reason why it becomes very important to name it. That's why it becomes very important to locate it, to understand location, and to be able to question the whole system.
Thank you, Sai.
And we need to also, one last thing, we need to be, if another way we keep Black trans women safe is we need to arm the girls, right? The girls need to be armed, period. That's just how I feel.
Yeah. Same question for Carolina, if you could interpret,
Yeah.
Mariana.
La pregunta es, Carolina, ¿quién beneficia del encarcelamiento?
¿Quién se beneficia?
Sí.
El sistema, el gobierno, sí, todo lo que, todas las personas, bueno, sí, el sistema. El
The system and the government benefit from incarceration. Gracias.
Go ahead, Draven or Tony.
Did you want to talk first, Draven, or are you okay with me talking?
You can go ahead and talk. It's fine.
Okay, girl. Sorry. Not. So I wrote that the ruling class who inherited their power from years of colonialism and, it were like, that is exactly why the system is built to continue to be propagated, is because of the fact that they don't want to lose their power. And because cis is centered in that power of, like how our imperialist government works, it also means that they have to maintain like the ways that transphobia like marginalizes people, queer people and trans people of color, because it's a threat for them to have to let go of power. Right now, we only see seats in the Congress and in the government that are white cis older males or whatever, And so I feel like that is what is being benefited from these institutions that deport us, that like incarcerate us, that create violence against us, is that they want to maintain the power that they gained from those generations of colonization. And yeah. Sorry, I didn't also mean to gender you, Draven. I usually say, okay, girl. But
I do the same thing. It's fine.
Okay.
I do it all the time. So no hard feelings, it's all good. So who benefits from this? So definitely corporations. Definitely want to also piggyback on what you just said, talking about representation in Congress and political offices. I did kind of notice this year with all the election stuff going on, as fun as that was to watch, I did notice like some trans people actually get elected to some offices in some areas. And I was very proud to see that. I was very, not even just shocked. I was just, happy that there's somebody out there that people can look at, and there's someone that represents me, even as just, a person of color, and as people, move up, the ladder of politics, it's crazy, it's kind of like what you just talked about. It's like, who's making these laws, who's creating this setup for these corporations to just make, outrageous amounts of money, on the labor that these people don't get paid for, and while we're trying to, shut the system down and abolish everything, we have to keep in mind that 25% of our population is still incarcerated. So it is important to focus on ending the prison industrial complex. But we also have to take care of the people that are still incarcerated and they're still dying. And we need to figure out, while we do this the proper way, how do we provide direct support to the currently incarcerated people, the post-incarceration support, the housing, the education, the employment. You have to build sustainable and community service programs that will help support them once they're transferred out of prison. Because, you have like post-incarceration syndrome, there's just a whole lot of stuff going on. But of course, these companies, these businesses, they're benefiting, because you have people that are incarcerated. They're not making any money. These people will get up and do hard labor all day. They're not making any money. Someone else is benefiting off of these people, and, getting into a whole nother conversation about the people who are incarcerated that shouldn't be. That's a whole nother conversation. what do we do to support these people while they're still in there? And what can we do to start dismantling this system that is all just for profit?
Whoa, yeah. Thank you for saying that, Draven. You bring up a good point. So question, real talk. Can we actually dismantle these systems without being a part of them? And can we abolish police without abolishing prisons, and vice versa? What are those things? Oh, I see some smiles on people's faces when I just asked that. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it real. These questions.
I'm gonna keep it all the way 1,000. I'm
Go
not gonna
ahead,
play these
son.
fucking games. I'm not gonna play these fucking games. You cannot get rid of a prison house and keep the police house. That's not how that works. You cannot keep the prison house and keep the police house too. If one goes, both must go. If the prison house is gonna go, the police house gotta go too. Okay?
Thank you, Sai. I hope you're still there. Anyone else? Mariela, do you want to interpret for Carolina?
Yeah, I was texting it. La pregunta que agregó Chela es que si podemos cerrar cárceles y continuar con policía o viceversa. ¿Crees que podemos terminar con la policía y continuar el sistema de cárceles?
No, yo pienso que estos lugares, ni cárceles ni detenciones deben de existir. No tienen la capacidad para tener a ninguna persona segura, ni para tener la capacidad para poder corregir a alguien, como hay lugares de corrección y todo eso. Eso no debe de existir. Ni un animal debe de estar encerrado, menos una persona. Así es que esos lugares deben de ser cerrados totalmente, ni cárceles ni detenciones.
Muy bien. Carolina shares no detention center, no prison should exist. No human, no animal should be in a cage. These are not centers where you can, or places where you can get well or get better. They're not designed for that. So I believe that they should all be closed.
Okay, Draven, go ahead next.
Well, sorry, I don't have COVID, you guys. It's that is just a really big, that's just a really big thing. And, I'm right there, with what they just said, about, like, you can't get rid of a prison and still have, police, because that's just not how that works. You have to go like FBI, police, state, local, how do we dismantle this and still put something in place to rehabilitate people? Like, I'll be the first person to say, I'm not okay with us transporting millions of people, making millions of dollars off of people who are locked up without running water, without, anything like that. It's just not humane. That there's no way to think that you could put these people in an environment like this and expect them to come out and be just okay in society, no help, no programs, no nothing like that. So what I think we should do is that we should either start local or start higher up and just create rehabilitation programs or sustainable living programs or somewhere, because you still, while you are dismantling these systems, you also have to think about the people who have been living in these conditions. And then you also have to think about neighborhoods who have, a lot of crime. Like, you have poverty and you have crime. So you have to stop and think about these people as well. Now, as someone who's a person of color, I'm a Black man. Sometimes I do have to get worried, if I'm driving or if I'm going in the store or whatever. We need to figure out, how do we have all of these conversations but still successfully dismantle it? Do we start, do we just kind of take away police first? But then, like you said before, you can't take away the police and still have prison. So what do we need to put in place that will successfully work? And my personal opinion is that we should just put in rehabilitation programs, because a large percentage of people who are incarcerated are not incarcerated for violent crimes. These are things that can be, corrected. A lot of people who are incarcerated also are incarcerated because of survival work. So if we put these programs in neighborhoods that need them the most, with the highest rate of people who are incarcerated, we could very well kind of put like a wedge right there, right in between the, like the prison to, I'm sorry, I'm tired. I've been doing this all day. The pipeline, prison pipeline, because you also have to think, and like, I live in kind of not really a rural area, but not a very popular area where, you have like resource officers. So at a younger age, kids are getting intimidated by police officers. They're learning this behavior and it's either subconscious or in their face. And it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't have to put police officers in schools to, handle children. It's ridiculous.
Thank you, Draven. Go ahead, Tony.
I think one of the hardest questions is, can we do prison and police abolition while the U.S. exists, as the way it exists today? So I think that to me is the most difficult part of the question for me to answer. Can we create this abolition movement and successfully get rid of the police and the prisons with the U.S. still existing? I think for me it comes back to we can start creating communities that are based on we can do our own form of social justice or justice what is it called, justice reform or what it was. It's
transformative justice or restorative
there you
justice.
go.
Yeah,
Transformative justice, that's what I was trying to think. And like, can we start doing that to intercept police interjection into community conflict and stuff like that, and accountability? Can we create accountability without the police? And that's the first thing I think we should start learning how to do, is learning the tools of what can we do as a community to confront abusers? What can we do as a community to hold people accountable? What can we do as a community? What can we do as a community to be like, to form autonomous ways of dealing with problems in our communities, so that we at least get rid of that leash that we have to the police? Because right now we depend on the police for things that like such as assault and everything, or emergencies. So can we create our own like system to function without the police, and then we can make bigger goals?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that like as folks who are working towards liberation, it's more than just one way, right? Like it's more than just one layered, right? We have to think about economic injustice. We have to think about safety. We have to think about women getting raped. We have to think about housing, mental health issues. We have to think about all these things. And just even saying it is tiring, real talk. But I think that, I think that's the only way we're gonna fucking win, real talk. I have a question for y'all. Would it make y'all safer or feel safer? Does it make you feel safe or safer knowing there's either trans people or queer people or GNC people that are police, that are working with La Migra, that are working with in prisons and jails? Does that make you safer? Does it make you feel safer? And also, does it make, you bring this up, Draven. I just want to bring it out a little bit more and think about, what does it mean to have someone who's a trans or queer person, even if they're white, in the government, right? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What does that really help us? Sai, go for it first. Sai, you still here? If you're not here, it's okay. We can move on to Carolina.
Can you hear me now? Can y'all hear me? So we have to understand that, right? Politics, reform, there's no situation of reform when we talk about trans people and we talk about our right to exist in public space, there's nothing really that political reform has really done for us, really, right? Because, and the reason why that is because there is no legislation where trans people are specifically spoken about, specifically, right? And until we, first of all, I don't believe that we should have a law that specifically names trans people. We're talking about making it specifically illegal to kill trans people, right? For reasons of hate. But even the laws that we have on hate crimes, they do not explicitly list transgender people. And so we need to understand that there is no law, there is no policy, there is no lawmaker that has adequately addressed the needs of the trans community, period. That's just how that is. So I don't think that you can work in the system to dismantle the system. I think that that is a lie to recoup us. I think that is a lie that has been told to recoup us back into the status quo.
Thank you, Sai. Go ahead, Carolina. Mariela, can you interpret?
Yes, I shared the question in the chat. La pregunta es si te sientes más segura si hay policías trans. The question was if you feel safer if there's trans police officers.
No, no, para nada. El policía es el sistema, policía. No lo creo en el sistema, yo no creo en el gobierno, yo no creo en nada de eso y no me sentiría, no, tampoco el sistema es cruel. El sistema educa para hacer el mal. No me sentiría a gusto, la verdad.
No, not at all. I wouldn't feel comfortable or safe at all. They would still be part of the system, and the system is cruel. The system is harmful
Inhumano.
and inhumane.
Y el sistema es policía y el policía es el sistema.
And the system is the police, and the police are the system. Gracias, Caro.
Go ahead, Draven.
Okay, now it works. Sorry about that. Like I was saying earlier, I did talk about political representation. And that is something that is important to me. But at the same time, also, like, listening to what everyone was saying, it does kind of make a little bit more sense. It's almost like, I don't want to call it pandering, but it's almost like, okay, let me do this, or let me move this around this much so that you can trust me, see that this works a certain way, maybe, and I hate to think like that. I hate to think like, okay, you're going to gain our trust. We're going to think this is awesome. We're going to, do all these laws and we're going to try this stuff. Will that hurt us in the long run? And that's just something, I'm Indigenous. I see a lot of, political and Western ideas and, stuff like that. And I get kind of cautious sometimes. So would someone who was a gender nonconforming police officer make me feel safe? No. And the reason why I'm going to say that is going to be, that sounds really awful. Just because someone else has a shared experience or a similar experience to me as a gender nonconforming person, that does not mean that we carry any of the same ideologies or any of the same, political beliefs or anything like that. And it's kind of like what everyone else was saying. It's like you become a part of the system to dismantle the system, but the system becomes a part of you. I know many people who have gone into like police work and correction stuff. And, my sister went into the army to be a military policeman. When she started her training, she had literally had no idea who she had become because the training is so intense, and she quit. Because, you can go in and say, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be a good person. I'm going to stop that. I'm not going to, I'm going to be a good cop. There really is no such thing, and I hate to really say it like that, but, it's all about making sure that we're all safe as a collective, as collective beings. And I just don't think that if we really feed into what they're trying to give us, I'm not sure if that'll be safe for us in the long run. Because like someone else was saying, there are no specific laws that state, hey, this is wrong, especially explicitly for gender non-conforming people. And until that's there, we are trying to get there now. We just still need to be just a little bit more cautious because we still are fighting for basic human rights.
All right, thank you, Draven. Go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, no, we can't trust anybody who is going to be a participant of the system. And I think that what we have to remember is that the system was structured to reproduce itself. Everything from the pedagogy of how you engage, how you like get into your position or role or whatever of power. Like the pedagogy is meant to make you like put the rules or ideologies out there that they are teaching you. I also really want to recognize, just because we have people who are going into Congress and whatever, is that going to stop queer and trans Black people from being killed? Is that going to stop queer and trans people from outside of the United States, who are hurt by the imperial war machine? Is that going to stop them from being killed or having their lands taken away? I think we need to think a little bit further than what our situations are in the US, and remember that queer and trans POC exist all over the world. And so we need to remember that too. This is not going, like, our participation in the system is not going to stop us from going to war with other countries. It's not going to stop us from taking resources from other countries where queer and trans people exist as well.
Thank you, Tony. Y'all, I have a few more questions, of course. And I also have something to say on all these issues. Hashtag, of course, Shelly Cubero. I want to know, I just have the question and it just left my head. Give me 10 seconds. Oh, there you go. So these nonprofits, the gay and lesbian centers, all the good shit. Do they benefit from policing, or do they benefit from abolition? Who are they really benefiting from? Who do y'all think? Who would y'all say they're supporting? Sai, still with us? If you're not, then we will move on. I guess you are not. We will move on to, oh, I see the baby. Mariela, can you interpret for Carolina and
Yes.
and
Thank
ask
you,
her
Chela.
about the LGBT Center in like Tucson and all the nonprofits? Who are they supporting these? Are they supporting abolition? Are they actually supporting the criminalization of trans of color?
La pregunta, Carolina, es si organizaciones no lucrativas grandes como los centros LGBT, si ellos están a favor del estado policial o a favor de la abolición del cierre de cárceles y cierre de policías. ¿Qué piensas tú desde Tucson?
Yo pienso que debemos de estar a favor de cierres de centros de detención y de centros de las cárceles de policías. Y deben de haber más lugares de educación, de oportunidades de trabajo para las mujeres trans de color y para la educación y para que haya más profesionalismo de mujeres trans. Y yo pienso que debemos de estar a favor de los cierres de detención, no a favor de.
Muy bien. ¿Y qué piensas de las organizaciones no lucrativas, como non-profits se llaman, no lucrativas, que como el centro LGBT, no sé si tienen centro allá en Tucson, si están a favor del cierre de detención o están a favor de la policía? I'm just adding the question specifically for LGBT centers or nonprofits. ¿Qué
No te-
piensas?
¿Qué pienso
Que
de
si,
qué? ¿Qué
que
pienso?
si organizaciones LGBT, otras organizaciones están a favor del cierre de cárceles o están a favor de la policía, organizaciones grandes como centros de de comunidades
Están a favor
lesbianas,
de,
gay.
sí, pienso que están a favor del cierre de centros. Yo no pienso que si es un grupo que está apoyando personas LGBT, no creo que estén a favor de que haya estos lugares. Así es que no creo.
So Carolina first answered personally that she is in favor of closing all of these prisons and detention centers. And so that was just clarifying what about other organizations. And she believes that other organizations who are pro LGBTIQ plus are also in favor of closing prisons. She also talked about the need to open other centers, other spaces to support trans communities to access more work was one of the examples.
Thank you, Mariela. Go ahead, Tony. I mean, Draven.
Hey, yeah. So when it comes to like LGBT centers and those really, really, big nonprofit organizations, I personally don't have a lot of experience with them because the area I live in, we do not have LGBT centers at all. I think the closest one is probably all the way in South Florida, or maybe Jacksonville. I'm not sure if they have one there. They are actually actively now working to create one here, which I kind of have had some help in. But since I'm not as familiar with them, I know I did live in Los Angeles a couple years ago. I do see the work that they're doing. I see what they're trying to do, and I do respect that, and I do understand that. But at the same time, I just feel like, as a person who spoke before me, it's, I would be probably in favor of not necessarily having just specific centers like that, because, with something that big, you draw attention. And then you could also potentially create more targets. Like, I'm not sure if that really makes a lot of sense, but, like, I just feel like maybe we should just be a little bit more cautious when it comes to trusting, organizations, because, it's happened in the past, with bigger organizations or nonprofits, they're saying they're trying to help, gender nonconforming people, but then really, they just turn out to be, more of an issue. So they might cause more problems than they're trying to. So I'm all for definitely like closing those.
Tony, go ahead. Your turn.
Yeah, I think that with nonprofits, it's always gonna be problematic. I mean, like, for LGBT centers that I've experienced, and even the centers that provided harm reduction, substance abuse programs for specifically LGBTQ people, there is still that hierarchy that exists behind them of cis white gay males that are running the show. And there's it's almost like a corporate hierarchy. So there's still profit being brought into those LGBT centers. They're still building relationships with corporations in order to fund their nonprofit. And we have like if it's mostly predominantly like cis white gay males that are like who are the counselors, who are like the directors, project coordinators or whatever, like how is it helpful for queer and trans people of color to have very little representation in these positions of power? Like, I know that for, some trans queer spaces, they do have a direction towards, social justice, but it's like it's kind of like, there's barriers to what they consider social justice because they're still working within a system where they have to respect the law and all these other things. That's my main concerns about LGBT centers.
So sorry, did you catch the question?
Tell me the question again, Mamas.
Okay, so the question is, so these LGBT centers and all these non-profits, are they pro-abolition or does it seem like they actually work towards, the oppression?
So when you think about corporations like the center, when you think about corporations like quote unquote nonprofits, also like uh gay pride, right? Pride, when you think about organizations like Pride, you must understand that they also have to do initiatives, they have to do nonprofit work that goes along with these contracts that they get, right? And so sometimes they are contracted to do trainings with police officers, right? And so that means that they understand on a very intrinsic level that this work must help incarcerate people, right? That means that on an intrinsic level, people who work for these organizations must understand. They have a complete understanding that the work they're doing goes hand in hand with incarceration. They know it. So then the question then becomes, why don't those of us who actually go to Pride, right, understand that, right? Those of us who actually give money to Pride, who actually give our time to Pride, why don't we make it our business to know the ins and outs of these $1 million nonprofits, the way the people who work for it know that this money is going to further incarcerate people? Why don't we know that information? Ignorance is no longer going to be in these few coming years. Oh, I didn't know that that's how nonprofits worked. That's not going to fly, right? We must have that information and disseminate it to our youth, right? We must let them know, hey, hun, if you decide to go to Pride, you have to think about the implications of what that means for a Black person, right? We must do that intentional work. Not as allies, but as those of us who carry those identities in our bodies, trans people, Black people, queer people. We have to go about telling our young people, hey, if you're going to go to Pride, hun, you need to understand that there are sacrifices that come with expressing your pride. So that's just what I think about when I think about these organizations and them being nonprofit and the nonprofit model. That's what I think about, is the lack of real education surrounding what nonprofits are.
Thank you, Sai. Okay, I actually have something to say on this too. And there's a reason I was doing this a lot when she was saying things, just acknowledging I have a story, I have a past with LGBT Center here in LA and West Hollywood, which is the gay Mecca, right? Besides San Fran, which is like, they are literally, they receive hundreds, if not thousands, if not of dollars to train police officers on how to arrest trans people. Like, real talk, how do you humanize a person when you're dehumanizing them, right? That's number one. Number two, the West Hollywood, district of the police, about in 2015, I believe, 16. For those who don't know, every year there's this event called Trans Day of Remembrance, where it's a day where we commemorate those who lost their lives due to trans and gender nonconforming violence. For this specific year, West Hollywood's police, they decided to team up with LGBT Center and the trans, I forgot what the name of the group was. It was like the trans, I don't want to say it's economic, but something trans in WeHo. Oh, the Trans Advisory Board, there you go. Transit Advisory Board of West Hollywood. They teamed up with them and did a rally. The same day, it's not their district, but a cop shot an unarmed brown man. Like, we cannot think about one oppression without thinking about the other. And another thing, I'm sorry, I would have wrote thinking about this shit. They literally have called police on houseless folks that are chilling outside, because where they're at, it's like there's a lot of homeless youth, but there's also a lot of other homeless folks, because homeless folks realize that homeless folks are getting pushed out of Venice and Santa Monica, so they think Hollywood is safer. So they go to Hollywood, and like one of the places they chill around is one of the buildings of the LGBT Center. And guess who they call every time to clean it up? The police. Not to mention, they also support council member Mitchell Farrell, who I completely hate. So there you go. And if you don't know who Mitchell Farrell is, he's a gay man who swears up and down he's pro-LGBT. But the same day he allowed trans folks to write all Black Lives Matter or Black Trans Lives Matter, he was kicking out homeless people on the street so that they could do a march, a rally. Fuck that. Yeah. So I'm just saying, so I'm using all this to say, I know I'm like going around the rope right now. There's a lot of things they have that these LGBT centers, specifically in LA, they have an invested thing with the police. They have a relationship with them. Every year, even the Trans Advisory Board, it sucks to say this, but the Trans Advisory Board has a relationship with the police. And it's like, are y'all for our liberation? Or are you for our fucking oppression? Just letting y'all know that. Okay, this is my last question for everybody. What is missing out of the conversation of abolition? Abolition of police and abolition of the prisons and jails and detention centers. What is actually missing out of these conversations? I will go with Carolina first, because...
Yeah. La pregunta es, ¿qué es lo que está faltando de la conversación o conversaciones sobre abolición, el cierre de cárceles, cierre de centros de detención y cierre de sistema de policías? ¿Qué es lo que falta en estas conversaciones?
Más educación, más entendimiento, mejor organización. Sí, más organización, más entendimiento y más educación y más comunidad.
More education is missing, more understanding, more organizing, and more community is missing in these conversations. Gracias, Caro.
Okay.
Can I go ahead and say what's missing, Chels?
Yes, Bo.
What's missing for me as a Black trans woman who is documented, who's missing out of this conversation is Black trans women who are undocumented, right? Immigrant women, Black immigrant women stand alongside Chicana women in this struggle, right? When I think about the women who are liberating, who are going to liberate us, right? First of all, the burden doesn't go all on a woman like myself or all on a woman like Chella. The burden also goes on those undocumented women who actually can say, this is what my experience is. This is what's going to help me get out of this situation, right? Because in that Black undocumented woman saying her truth, being from Nigeria or being from Cameroon, she's going to tell the truth of a Chicanic Black trans woman trying to cross the border. She's going to tell what food services she needs, what clothing services she needs. You get what I'm saying? So that's what's missing out of this conversation for me, is the presence of Black immigrant women, right? From East Africa, from West Africa, from North Africa. That's what's missing out of this conversation, is Black immigrant women. And I would say to those sisters, welcome, we love you, we do this for you, and we're led by you, and don't for those people who might doubt your role, I don't doubt your role, and I hope that you will do the work of creating new roles as we neglect you. That's what's missing out of this conversation, is what I said and the people that I mentioned.
Thank you,
It's
Sai.
step up.
Draven, go for it.
Okay. So you asked the question, what's been missing from the conversation? One thing that I have noticed, a lot of times when I do sit and talk to people who do discuss formerly incarcerated people, is that a lot of times there aren't people who are formerly incarcerated actually giving their voice to these situations. We're talking about how we can help these people, but we're not actually letting them tell their stories so that we can acknowledge, hey, this is an issue. We're just kind of sitting around like, you know, I think this would help, or I think that would help, but we really need to get it from the people that are currently and formerly incarcerated. We also have to talk about the trauma. The prison pipeline, post-incarceration syndrome. 86% of incarcerated women have trauma prior to incarceration, and actually 100% of gender nonconforming people were assaulted prior or during their incarceration. So that's also something, you know, that you have to kind of think about. You have to think about post-incarceration syndrome. No one talks about post-incarceration syndrome. In case people who do not know what that is, post-incarceration syndrome is a mix of mental disorders with about 4 clusters of different symptoms. So that talks about institutionalized personality traits. So that's pretty common when people are incarcerated. It's kind of like learned helplessness, because you have to face like prison authorities, and it's kind of just like antisocial defenses. Post-traumatic stress disorder, that's from trauma before being incarcerated and also during and after. Antisocial personality traits. So it's kind of like a coping response that these people have because what they've been through is so traumatic. And then you have like institutional abuse and just a lot. You also have social sensory deprivation. So you have to think these people have been incarcerated. So these people are kind of just locked in this enclosed space with no way to contact the outside world, really, you know, other than maybe a few phone calls. So exposure to solitary confinement, that would definitely mess with, you know, your sensory issues. You have substance abuse. So we have to implement trauma recovery programs for incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people. Because if these people are getting out of prison, we need to know we need to know, you know, kind of what they've been through or how to address it. You know, you can't take someone who's been incarcerated for 10 years and throw them into the street. And I feel like we do that way too often. There needs to be like a middle ground. There needs to be something that's more like, hey, I see you're struggling. Let me help you be successful in re-entering society.
Tony, you're next.
Well, I wanted to. This question has so many different answers that can go to it. I think one of the things is important is one of the things that I feel like is missing is like, how do we prepare for abolition? What are we doing, you know, like to prepare our communities for abolition? I think there's so many layers to what abolition is. It's so hard to figure out where do we start. I think we need to create like, you know, like what can we do now? Of course, that's important. Like we can create programs like harm reduction centers, you know, syringe exchange programs, things that are going to, but those things I don't know if they're sustainable. So I think we have to continue thinking deeper and deeper and deeper, like about what abolition really means. You know, I think it's important. Police abolition and a prison abolition are both important things. You know, like I think we couldn't. There's a possibility we can succeed without having to dismantle the U.S. as a whole. But I think that's a question we also need to think about a little bit more, because can it happen? And if so, what can we do to dismantle the U.S. As a regime? But that's a really deep. That's too deep of a question right now. So it's complex. I think. And I think we have to remember that this conversation is complex and it's going to be hard to answer some questions, but that's okay too.
I think it's also important to remember. I loved what Draven said about like the folks who are most impacted of this conversation not being a part of this conversation. So that's real. And I do want to acknowledge that. I also wanted to acknowledge that I'll say what my own answer is. I'm gonna put my own answer. I'm trying to keep it real. So I have some shit. I agree with what a lot of y'all said. I think folks with disabilities, I think children of incarcerated people are not in the conversation. What happens to families and children? I think like, you know, there's a lot of groups. There's one big group in the Bay doing things around recidivism, especially with trans women. And is TJGIJP, I think, Transgender Something Project. I mean, that's in the Bay, but that's the only thing I know. That's the only one I know that does stuff for incarcerated folks. I think that's left out of the conversation. I think deaf people and hard of hearing people, I think they are left out of the conversations a hell of a lot. And I think, you know, in the idea of policing, right? I think what can we do? What can we do now, right? When it comes to police, what can I do instead? Like, there's all these like, you know, groups that are like that were doing a lot of like things pre-COVID, but right now COVID is like, you know, COVID, you know, it's happened. And I think just being honest, like COVID has put a stop to that conversation, even though the violences are still happening. The violences are like actually doubling, right? And these conversations need to keep going. So those are my things I needed to say about my own question. But Draven, yes. What do y'all want people to know? What do y'all want people? What do you want to say? It's kind of your last thing. You want to say something? It's your time to say something you would love people to hear. And then yeah. So starting with Sarah.
Well, I'm gonna say that, and then I'm gonna go ahead and say what I think people need to understand and know, and then I'm gonna head out. But one of the things that I think that I want to be said, right, is I am the child of a person who was impacted by somebody from who was affected by mass incarceration. My father spent the majority of my life, of my child life, behind bars. And so mass incarceration affected my home, my siblings, my life directly. The war on drugs impacted my life, my family, my community directly. Watergate, right, is proof that our communities have been lied to, have been cheated, stolen from. If you don't know what Watergate is, I suggest you look it up because it is very it brings a very profound idea to the notion of who was impacted by Richard Nixon's his administration. And so when you look at my face as a Black trans woman and you think about who it is that is being impacted by mass incarceration, who it is that is being impacted by the United States practicing slavery as punishment for a crime, it's this, right? It is my father, right? Who has been clean and remarried now for over 10 years, right? So we have to really put real faces to these tragedies, right? These tragedies of broken homes, these tragedies of stolen lives, these tragedies of children being separated from mothers and grandparents and fathers. We have to put real faces to these stories. And I hope that looking at my face, you'll understand that I also have consent from my parents to share this story about how mass incarceration and the war on drugs has impacted our lives as Black people in our community. And so I would encourage you to go out seeking what your stories are of how this American regime
is affecting your life, because there are stories. You just have to go find them. And you have to be willing and open to hear them from the person that will say to you, because you love me and you know me, it's your story too, right? And so I would encourage you to go out seeking that. That's what I would say in closing.
Go ahead, Mariela. Let
Sí.
Carolina.
Carolina, nomás para cerrar, última pregunta, cualquier comentario, algo que quieras compartir, puede ser sobre tu historia, algo con que nos quieras dejar al público.
Sí, gracias, Mariela. Nada más quiero agradecer el espacio y también decir que me hubiese gustado entender más toda la conversación, que desgraciadamente no entendí muchas cosas, pero espero y hayan entendido mi forma de ver el cómo fue el sistema o ha sido el sistema para mí.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for the space. There were some things I was not able to understand. I hope you all were able to understand what I was sharing and how the system has impacted me.
Por mi experiencia, que sé que he pasado más de 3 años encerrada en un centro de detención y sé que mi voz es importante en estos espacios, pero también es importante entender de lo que se está hablando, entender de lo que se está tratando para poder seguir, estar en las conversaciones. Sé que las historias son muy importantes.
Mm-hmm. So as for me, I was in a detention center for more than 3 years, and it's important for me to participate in these conversations. It's also important for me to understand the conversation fully.
Y también me gustaría que entendieran que a veces las personas que salimos de un centro de detención, estando un día o estando años, el encarcelamiento es enfermedad, el encarcelamiento es una pandemia también.
And whether I want people to understand that whether you or we are incarcerated for one day or for many years, it's an illness, it's a sickness. Incarceration is a pandemic.
Y hay muchas personas que nos curamos rápidamente de una depresión, de un estrés, de una ansiedad, pero hay personas que el encierro nos ha enfermado de tal manera que no podemos curarnos a corto tiempo.
For some of us, we can get over depression or anxiety quickly, but for some of us who have been incarcerated, it is a much longer process to get through anxiety and depression and illness.
Y yo sé que hay personas que han sufrido mucho más que yo y están luchando, pero desgraciadamente la falta de conocimiento, la falta de entendimiento, la educación, a veces no ayuda mucho, pero estoy agradecida de que estoy luchando por mí, por mi comunidad y seguiré haciéndolo. Muchas gracias por el espacio. Yo de verdad me tengo que ir porque estoy en Phoenix y tengo que viajar a Tucson. Les agradezco por todo este espacio y ojalá en el futuro pueda entender mucho más para poder seguir luchando por la abolición de cualquier sistema opresivo.
Yes, I just want to say thank you again for participating in this conversation. I do have to go. I'm in Phoenix, driving to Tucson. I think the conversation of abolition and closing those systems and any system is really important. ¿Y puedes repetir lo que dices al principio, Caro? Dije todo lo último, nomás me faltó.
Yo no me recuerdo.
No, yo tampoco. And I forgot what Carolina said right at the beginning of this comment, but she was just sharing her gratitude for this conversation.
Gracias, gracias, gracias.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
We love you, Carolina. We love you, Carolina.
I
Te
love you.
queremos, Carolina. Te queremos.
Es un privilegio que escucha tu historia y tu historia está muy importante.
Sí.
Muchas gracias.
Sí.
Thank
Nos
you.
vemos.
Mucho gusto.
Que llegues bien.
Bye,
Bye, bye.
Nos vemos.
Oh, I was unmuted. I was muted. Okay, yeah. Next would be Draven.
Hi. going off of the first person that was speaking, kind of going off of what they were talking about, I know this is going to sound kind of crazy, but if you really go about your day-to-day life and you're not extremely involved in conversations about incarceration, it can be extremely easy to overlook it. I had never, my father's been incarcerated. All of my brothers have been incarcerated. My brother was just incarcerated in prison for 5 years for something that he didn't do. So he was just recently released and suffering from extreme post-incarceration syndrome. So it's kind of easy to kind of think, oh, this kind of stuff doesn't apply to me, or, kind of hear something and think, oh, well, that can't be me. And most definitely can be you. Something that I came across about a year and a half ago was an organization called Freedom Overground. I was just, looking online, and I found this nonprofit, and, I'm always kind of wary about, some stuff whenever I read about some stuff. But I was doing a project for one of my classes, and I was to bring awareness about something that isn't normally talked about. So I decided to speak with them and start organizing with them and talking to them and doing reentry programs. So whenever the people that they're helping are released, they would have some kind of plan. And the reason why I kind of talk about Freedom Overground is because it is, for me personally, the first and only time I had ever heard of someone talking about directly helping incarcerated gender nonconforming people, people of color, people who are like in there suffering, going through this day to day. And, these are people that are going there, actually helping them, actually saying, okay, this is what you need. Let me help you. And, I was kind of thinking about that earlier, Cello, when you were talking about like all these nonprofits and they get like millions of dollars and they're just going to turn around and, basically just give us to the police. And I was really shocked when I saw, someone doing something otherwise. So as someone who has family members who have been incarcerated, and I do understand that, as a trans person and as a person of color, my risks of being incarcerated, my chances of being incarcerated are very high. Whether I think that will never happen to me or not, it doesn't matter. My choice, my risk factor is very high. My mother was, she's not from here. She was undocumented when she first got here. She was also incarcerated. So there's a lot of conversations that we need to have. We need to make it normalized. We can't just sit around and be like, oh, because, a lot of people are like that, they're just like, oh, you've been, incarcerated. Like they kind of look at you a different way. And it shouldn't be like that. We should kind of look at people and be like, okay, here, this is your experience. This is your story. Tell me what I can do to help you, instead of just making it kind of like a taboo thing. So that's what I try to do. Especially, I just try to, go out and I just try to tell people, hey, this is what's going on. It might not be something you've heard of, but this is definitely going on. So.
Thank you for sharing that, being personal. Tony, you're the last. What do you want to say?
I wanted to say that I know that there's so much work that needs to be done for abolition work. And there's so many different ways that we can accomplish that. I unfortunately I'm going through disability and trying to work on my disability Social Security. I feel like that fits in somehow with abolition discussion because of the fact that it's been 4 years for me to get. I mean, I applied the first time and it took me 3 years to get a rejection from the judge. And then I'm reapplying again and I feel already exhausted. I don't want to do this all over again, but I don't know what I'm going to do with money. So it's like my participation in movements is so limited because I'm aware of what needs to be done for abolition. I also feel stunted and crippled by the current process I'm in, meaning that like I don't have the ability to organize and be a part of these movements that are so necessary. But I mean, I am doing in a way I'm doing the abolition work right now, just being in this panel. So it's a privilege to be in this panel, and I am really happy to be here and to be able to speak, and that makes me feel special.
Well, that's I do want to round something up by saying something. So I'm gonna be honest. Draven is a person that's a Facebook friend, and we were talking about this conversation because I reached out on Facebook and they responded, and then we started talking. They're like, "Yeah, I've done." They did some work, or they worked with they worked around this case. If y'all don't know, a few years back, Kai Peterson. He was a trans Black man that was assaulted, and they found him guilty of assault, threw him in prison or in jail, and threw him in the same cell as his attacker. And he sat there for years. And that just, yeah, just thinking about people that are actually, I mean, he's out now, but like thinking about him, thinking about Cece McDonald, a Black trans woman who defended herself against an attacker. She stabbed a white supremacist in self-defense, and like literally they put her on trial for pretty much her own assault. And just thinking about them, they're both Black, one being a Black trans woman, the other one being a Black trans man, and thinking about like those folks could have been in this conversation, right? But I'm paying them out of my money, real talk, and I would want to give them something deeper. So I'm just gonna say this. I think the 3 collectives y'all need to like look out for. TGIJP, they do amazing work in the Bay. Be Heard, they're on Facebook. I can also link it here in a minute. Be Heard is for deaf folks who are in jails and prisons, because they need advocacy too, right? And then there's one where I was thinking about, I totally forgot it. Oh, Black and Pink, of course. And they're the ones that you can write. You can actually write, they'll find a pen pal for you to write to someone. And I actually have a pen pal. And it's a trans white woman who's a Wiccan. And like we talked about metal music, and she's really cool. It's really cool having a pen pal, being part of someone's being a part of someone's happiness, in some ways. Yeah, I think this conversation was needed. So thank the panelists, please give them a round of applause, y'all. Yes. Okay, do y'all got any questions for the ones that are left? I know we got 20 minutes left. So any questions, y'all can put them in the chat. Any?
Maybe just one question, Chilla. There was a comment here as well about, I guess, Pancake left. So they said, abolish the system within the system, prison industrial complex designed to dismantle family institution, privatize prisons is capitalization. Peace out. So that was Pancake's comment. I think there was another question. Let me just look it up. It was because we have holding the chat not be public because of Zoom bombing. I think it was something to the extent where, how do folks feel on the panel that this whole last year of uprisings and the calls for abolition and defunding of policing. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of going off of, I'm looking for the question. Did that really reach out to the trans queer, particularly trans Black community, as to be more inclusive about these issues and yeah, so something related to that. So how do people feel about that? Or basically, was it inclusive of the issues and the violence of the police, particularly as it's unleashed on Black trans folks?
I'll say something first. No. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, I got a message on this. No, because Tony McDade even, right? Like hardly anybody was talking about Tony McDade. Anybody. And he was shot by police. And it's like, you know, there's another conversation that needs to happen is this good person versus this victim versus perpetrator thing, right? Like this, oh, well, this person was a violent person like 2 years ago. So they must, you know, they deserve what they got today. It's like that kind of shit. And I'm gonna be real, most people who say that, you know, when it comes to race are white folks. And there's the respectability politics when it comes to Black folks when they say it. And then there's like the good immigrant versus bad immigrant narrative that I hear a lot of coalitions like actually do and say. And it's like, yeah, like literally, in the eyes of white supremacy and capitalism, we're all horrible. I'm sorry. So to answer that question, I did not see enough people saying their names. I did not see enough people saying Tony McDade's name or Malaysia Booker's name or like any other names that were murdered that were trans and Black. Anyone else?
Okay, I'm back. Well, I was gonna say that within those movements, there's still transphobia and queerphobia, like in these movements that have been happening since the pandemic started. You know, there is trans and queer women, queer Black women that have started the movement, but there's also people in the movement who are holding a lot of transphobic there's a lot of erasure that trans and queer people exist as Black people in those movements. You know, so I don't know. I think I think that there's a lot of work to do and within that, like that issue by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, sorry about that. I'm gonna kind of go off of what you really just said, Chella. No, absolutely not. And the reason why I start with that is because I'm not sure if there was a Black Lives Matter rally or a protest or what was going on when a trans woman was attacked. A Black trans woman was attacked, some kind of, you know, big event, and nobody talked about it. Nobody said anything. And I was like, okay, you know, like I know we're in the middle of like doing all this, but can we please, you know, make sure that everything's inclusive? And of course, you know, it's not. And that's just for whatever reason, the way that it's been. It doesn't have to stay that way. But then you're getting into like, you know, communities and their ideologies about certain things. And then how do we, you know, make sure that we're doing our part to kind of educate them in a way that's not, you know, super intrusive. Cause yeah, the way everything's going like this past year has just been awful, especially with like police brutality. And, you know, like you said with Tony McDade, that wasn't extremely, you know, that was something that I saw and I was like, oh yeah, like that's awful. But I didn't see anybody else really share too much about it. Or, you know, something I also talk about, like even if it's Black trans women that are murdered or people who are, you know, victims of police brutality or victims of the system, you hear about it for about 2 weeks and then you don't. Or you'll hear about it mentioned like, oh yeah, this kid, yeah. And then you don't. And we can put so much money and so much attention on things that aren't necessarily as important as, hey, maybe we should put our time more into that and figure out what we can do to combat this. And it's kind of what you were saying, Chella, as well. It's like, you know, when someone is a victim of police brutality, they're always like, well, you assaulted somebody, you know, like 30 years ago. When is when, and just as people in general, why do we have to feel like we can justify hurting another human being? There's no reason to justify at all to hurt another person or to take another person's life, no matter what the person did. And it's like what you were talking about with, like, you know, the victim and the perpetrator attitude. You just can't have that. You can't do that.
I do want to say there's another question, and I'll read it because it came to me privately. I don't know why. How can we get beyond abolition towards making reparations for the effects of prisons and police? And can we make reparations while also abolishing the U.S.? Ooh. Anyone want to put that up? Anyone in the coalition as well? I mean, I mean, yeah. Anyone want to pick that up? Draven, Tony?
I feel like that I kind of I think I kind of made that kind of like point earlier, like can we really have like, you know, like in terms of reparations, I don't know. And because there's so many things that are included in reparations, money is the most important one, of course, but like how can we like uplift like, you know, vulnerable communities, especially Black communities, you know? Can we do that with the US existing? I don't know. I feel like it kind of is the same exact question I was having about like, can we have a successful abolition movement with the US existing? I think that's all I gotta say.
Right on.
Sorry, y'all. Y'all hear sirens. The sirens are going off in my neighborhood right now. I'm muting. Hey, Baba, can you unmute Pinky Shear? They have a point they wanted to say.
Please go ahead and try to unmute Pinky. Go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Pinky Shear, and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and I am the co-founder of Freedom Overground with Kai Peterson, who Chella had just mentioned a few minutes ago. He's actually here listening as well. So we're just kind of observing and listening to everything. I was incarcerated in the same facility that Kai was in. And I wanted to, you had mentioned something about reparations. I'm a registered member of the Siksika Blackfoot Nation. And as a Native American, our tribes were awarded over $11 billion a few years ago during the Obama administration. We have yet to see a single penny of that. So what you have to understand when you're looking at reparations of any kind coming from the government towards poor treatment of human beings, it will purely be
Are you still there? Am I the only one that can't hear them?
No, I think she got cut off.
I'm
sorry.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
What
is
was
your
the
pronoun,
last
by the way,
part?
Pinky?
Huh?
What is your pronoun?
Oh, she, her. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to assume. Go ahead and say what you were saying.
What was the last part that you had heard?
I heard that like they still haven't given you all the money.
Correct.
Pretty much. That is so fucking bullshit. Are you still there? I'm confused.
Have passed during the process of waiting for this to happen. And they were individuals that were heavy in the fight for the reparations for Native Americans. And they've waited so long and they never received, no one has ever received anything from any of the United States tribes.
Thank you for saying that, Pinky. And hello to you, Kai. I shared your story a million times. Just being honest. Touches my heart that y'all both here. Okay.
He's waving at the computer. He's like, hey, waving at the computer.
So anybody else want to take that on? Any other?
I just kind of had a question. Like, when we are speaking about reparations, are we speaking about like taking money that was, say, we did abolish prisons or, police or anything like that? Are we talking about taking that money and investing it in these communities that do have a lot of poverty and doing that? Or are we talking about just directly paying people who have incarcerated?
Yeah. The person that wants to answer that question, do you want to answer that? That's Kyle. Can you unmute Kyle, Baba? I can ask to unmute.
Thanks.
There you go.
I was just generally curious about what happens next, and I don't know what form those reparations would take. That's part of the question as well. I'd be curious to hear what you think is the next step.
Okay, so I think of reparations in a few ways, right? Just knowing the work that we've been doing at Stop LAPD Spying / LA Can, and the like harm that LAPD specifically has done, right? And that we've been demanding reparations for victims of like certain programs that they have. And that being said, that being said, I think of like in terms of like, I think it looks many ways. I do think it looks like the money that was going into policing and prisons should be going to the survivors of these programs, especially the families, right? Because that recidivism causes like so much shit, especially when it's in families. And then like it just trickles down because like folks need to do what they need to do to survive, right? I'm always saying that Skid Row folks, the folks that come into Skid Row selling drugs are not selling drugs going back to their $15,000 mansions in fucking Melrose, right? They're literally going to their apartments in the hood. So like, how do we do these? How do we break down these like structures of number one, capitalism too, right? Like I am very much anti-capitalist, but like we live under capitalism right now, so we have to survive under it right now. So like I say these people we need to give them people their money, give them survivors their money, give people like Kai their money, give people like CeCe McDonald their money, give people that like other folk, Draven's parents, Cyrus' parents, my mom, like real talk, folks who've been in detention centers too, right? It's not just a one-sided thing. I hope I'm being clear. Anybody else have any other questions?
I wanted to say really quick that I think reparations can be also about giving land back, but like the reality is that we live under capitalism, and like what is happening for people living with disabilities who can't work, and those are the people that are currently on general assistance or food stamps, which is not a livable like income. And so those are important things to think about as well.
Yeah, you made me just think about this conversation I had with the Black trans woman a few months ago about like abolition, well, just actually capitalism too, right? And she was like, but what about my meds? Like, what about my moans, number one, and my diabetes meds, my hormone, my high blood pressure, and she also disclosed to me that she has AIDS. So like, she's like, I need those things to survive, right? So I'm also thinking around those things. Like, I'm also a bigger person that like y'all see me in the street, you know, I can't move around like without getting on an elevator. So like, I also think about these things too. I think community needs to show up more than it is. And especially community with more privileges, being real. I don't think it's on one person to think how they're going to survive. I think it's on all of us to figure out how all of us are going to survive. Because at the end of the day, it can't be on the person that's dealing with the most to have to think about their own liberation. It has to be like everybody and doing it, and not for them, but with them, right? But yeah, and also giving the land back. I definitely, yes. I think we are actually done for the night, y'all. Thank y'all for joining. I think I'm gonna try to do my best to like send out the sites that I named earlier so that y'all can like list them, and also Pinky and Draven, can y'all list the name of that org that y'all were naming so that we can, you know, also like support them and be in coalition with them. I have no announcements. So Hamid, do you have any announcements?
Yeah, just a couple that this is going to be uploaded on the website by Saturday, so folks can always download it or you know, take a look. All the previous 40 webinars are already up on the website too from last year. Next Tuesday is our War on Youth fight webinar. So definitely looking forward to that. And then the following third Tuesday is going to be our general coalition meeting, where we're going to continue this conversation about abolition. Because I think we're happy to hear all this conversation, because where we are headed, it's interesting that while there was a lot of movement last year, but the whole conversation around abolition, the way it's getting mainstreamed, it's also getting kind of commodified. And when foundations start coming into funding abolition work and things like that, we know that there's something is not moving in the right direction. So while there's definitely you know, reason to be excited about you know, how the ground may be shifting, but there's also reasons to be cautious as we move forward too. So please join us. And of course, the fourth Tuesday is the data-driven policing. So we're back in our webinar mode. Took a week off over the holidays, but happy to see people are healthy and safe, and look forward to seeing everybody next Tuesday, same place. Have a good night. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all for joining.
Thank you,
Thank
Chela,
you
for this
all.
brilliant and wonderful facilitation. Thank you, Chela.
Thank you, Chela. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mariela.
For sure. Have a good night.
Night, night.
It was a pleasure being with all of you tonight.
Likewise.
Likewise. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye. Take care, y'all.
Bye, Tony.
Bye.